Right. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Hopefully, you can all see and hear me without issue. Good, good, good. Excellent. I hope you all had a nice, safe, and relaxing reading week. I'm good. But whenever I get back from a long break like this, it takes a while to regain that momentum that I feel like I had. Oh, did they lose again? What are the Jays at in the series right now? I haven't been the best baseball fan. Oh no. Oh boo. Well, hopefully they can tie it up. I mean, they went into the series with a lot of momentum. You know what? I thought I would be lecturing inside, but it's actually quite nice today. So I thought let's stay outside as long as possible. Although I suspect that once November finally gets here, I will be inside. But I found a nice, comfy place to sit in there. So that should be good. A couple little housekeeping things before we get going. One is that I still haven't forgot about the list of possible essay topics for you. I know that a few of you said that you think that that would be quite helpful if I generated a list of topics. I'm thinking I'm going to stick quite close to the textbook here. So it'll be, it'll be things like rationalism versus empiricism, or traditional epistemology versus uh, one of the new directions of that epistemology took in the 20th century. Um, Coming up, we've got things about the nature of the mind, personal identity in the self. So I'll mention some theories that you could possibly adjudicate between there. So I'll come up with a list of topics kind of like that, which are kind of aimed at being adjudicative essays, topics for adjudicative essays. I know that, I said you can write a positive or a negative paper. You certainly can. But these will be the topics. They'll be sort of like adjudicatively formulated. They'll lend themselves to adjudicative essays. Yeah, that's right. That's due on the 14th. Today's lecture will not be on the quiz. No, today's lecture is going to be on universals. But that was the second thing I wanted to talk about was the quiz, which is live now, and which you can go ahead and work on if you want. The second quiz deals with theories of justification, new directions in epistemology, and perception. So we've covered all of that. Again, it's open book, which means you can use your notes, your slides, your readings. You can't copy and paste anything. You have to write, an original paragraph or two for each short written answer question. It's got to be in your own words. It can't be copied and pasted from anything. And a reminder that open book does not mean that you can consult search engines or generative AI. You don't need to, right? And again, and I know this is something that's difficult to prove. It's difficult to prove use of generative AI, but I'm just putting the word out there that the TAs did see some fishy stuff on the previous quiz. So this is a reminder not to be using that sort of technology. Yeah, the results of the first quiz are available. They've been available for some time now. Um, you have to go in. I don't see. I don't know about the student side of Brightspace. Um, there are instructions that you can find on the internet for how to look at your quiz feedback on Brightspace. The one thing that I really wanted to mention was that This quiz is actually it's worth the same percentage of your grade, but it's graded out of more points. I've added an additional point that you can earn to each of the short answer questions for clarity, for clarity and precision. Um, so that's why you'll see the quiz looks slightly different. You'll see that the short answer questions are graded out of 6 marks rather than 5. Um, with that said, we should pick up on our discussion of universals. So last time it was very cold outside and I was shivering and we went really quickly. We won't be worrying about that today, but last time we talked about um, strong realism with respect to universals. So strong realism, you know, think here of somebody like Plato, who thought of universals as these independently existing things, not really things, but universals exist over and above the particulars that instantiate them. Remember also that universals refer to things like the properties that we predicate to objects. So, um, there's green on my coffee sleeve, there's green on the grass, there's green on the leaves. These are all individual entities that instantiate the universal greenness. And if you're a strong realist, green exists over and above its particulars. In fact, if you're, a realist in the vein of Plato, then you probably think that universals are more real than the particular instances of them. And don't lose sight of the fact that all of this is really aimed at answering questions concerning abstract reference and attribute agreement. So a lot of this is actually rooted in questions that arise owing to the way that we're able to talk about universals, right? So, there are many green objects, green leaves, green blades of grass, green coffee cup sleeves, etc. And they all have this attribute, uh, this sort of attribute agreement between them. Green. This is green. That is green. That thing over there is green. How do we explain that? Well, the strong realist explains it by positing the universal green, which exists over and above those things. That's how individual things can agree in their attributes, because the universal is present in each of them. And then, of course, there's abstract reference. We can talk about this green item or that green item, but we can also just talk about greenness or the green independently of the items which instantiate the property. That's abstract reference. How do we explain that? Again, the strong realist is going to say, well, it's because there really is this universal green that exists over and above the particular things which instantiate it. I think a lot of people would say yes, Praneel. Um, yes, it's true that um, some languages have different color terms. Um, a strong realist, I think, would say that the universals still exist independently of whether we're able to name them as to pick them out as the universals they are. Um, Others will have different answers to this, though, which maybe we'll see today, especially because we're going to be talking about nominalism, which denies that there are universals. But I think a strong realist would say, yes, there are still these universals, maybe even if we don't have a name for them. Okay, so with that little recap done, let's talk about nominalism. So, as I mentioned, nominalism denies that there are universals. Um, Only particulars exist. So nominalism, is really all about names. So that green leaf, this green patch of grass. Here green is not a universal, it's just a name. a name for a characteristic that these individuals have. So the only these individual instances of green exist. There is no universal green. How did nominalism come about? Well, it goes back to the medieval thinker William of Ockham. William of Ockham is famously known for Occam's razor. And there are a couple different formulations of Occam's razor. You've probably heard the second one here. The simplest answer is most likely the correct answer. Um, that is one formulation. Another formulation, which I think you're more likely to encounter in like a philosophy course like this one, or future philosophy courses that you might take, is do not multiply entities beyond necessity. And here, entities means something like theoretical entities. So let's try and come up with some examples. What are some examples that you can come up with, or that you have maybe seen of Occam's razor um, being applied? And if you can think of something from the sciences, that would be particularly helpful. If you can't think of anything, don't worry. I do have an example, but I want to see what you guys come up with. So the Odyssey is an example of the opposite of Occam's razor, because that guy, I assume you mean Odysseus, took the least simplest answer every time. Okay. Yeah, that's actually really good. That's the opposite of, I know that Plato's not a nominalist, but Plato would say that, yeah, Homer, that's mythos, and what we want is logos. Maybe that's why they're not very parsimonious in the Odyssey, because it's a myth, right? Not an attempt to understand things using reason. Yeah, Preneel, this is an example. Maybe there's 11 dimensions and eight are hidden, but okay, maybe there's just three dimensions. Yeah, that's simpler. And there you go. That's a theoretical entity. Those dimensions that might be hidden, those are theoretical entities that Occam's razor would say we don't need, right? Yeah, doctors making an assumption. What's more likely? You have this weird disease from that like nobody ever gets, or you have a cold. Well, you could have the weird disease, but chances are it's a cold, right? Um, old civil engineers using how chains fell in gravity to make Gothic cathedral structurally. I'm not really sure um how that would be an example. Maybe you can explain a little more, Galen. I'm just not exactly, I don't quite see how that fits. It's an interesting idea. I didn't know that they did that. Um, the creation of, well, it could be. It could be. Then again, Caleb, it depends who you ask, right? I mean, a monotheist might say, um, we don't need all of these many different gods to explain the world coming into being. Rather, we just need the one God. But an atheist would say, we don't even need that one God. We need no gods to explain it, right? So maybe it depends who you talk to. Uh, okay, I see what you're saying. Galen, that's really interesting. I don't think it's an example of Occam's razor. Um, it is an example of a sort of heuristic, um, like a rule of thumb, though, which is quite interesting. Yeah, Khalid, that's great. That's actually the example that I often use. The heliocentric model of Copernicus versus the geocentric model of Ptolemy. Right? So Ptolemy was this dude from Egypt, one of the Greek kings of ancient Egypt in the line of Alexander the Great. They were all named Ptolemy because the original Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals, and he was in charge of Egypt after Alexander the Great died. And so they were just all Ptolemies after that. I forget which Ptolemy this was. I want to say the fifth, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, Ptolemy thought that the Earth lay at the center of the cosmos and the other planets, the moon, the sun, everything went around the Earth. But to explain the retrograde motion of the planets, he had to invoke ideas of these um, weird crystalline spheres on which the planets sat, which would explain their retrograde motion. So throughout the year, planets kind of move across the sky, and then they stop and move back, and then they move forward again. Ptolemy explained that by saying that, well, it's due to the perspective of these planets on these. They're orbiting us, but they're also spinning like this on these weird spheres, right? Copernicus comes along and says, well, what if we put the sun in the center? Now, Copernicus's model actually didn't work any better than Ptolemy's model did, um, in terms of, predicting the motions of the planets. They work just as well. Um, the geocentric or the heliocentric model actually only really surpassed the Ptolemaic model when Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler worked out that planets go around the sun in ellipses, not perfect circles. But the reason why the Copernican model started to win over the Ptolemaic model was because it was simpler, right? It didn't work any better in terms of predictive or descriptive power. It was just simpler. So, yeah, that's a great example. Um, and here, for our purposes, Occam's razor says, well, let's not multiply these universals, or let's not even invoke them. Those are theoretical entities that we don't need. The nominalists would say their view is simpler when it comes to explaining attribute agreement and abstract reference because it doesn't posit the existence of universals. It just says, well, there's this green thing and that green thing, et cetera, et cetera. We'd be unnecessarily overcomplicating things if we invoked a universal green to explain abstract reference and attribute agreement. So there you have it. Now let's look at a couple of different kinds of nominalism. So one is strict nominalism. On strict nominalism, if we use a word that seems to refer to a universal, like green, what we're actually doing is just referring to green individuals. So if I say, like, this apple is green, this pear is green, Kermit the Frog is green, etc. What I'm referring to with those utterances is not the universal green. Like this is like, think about it. When I say I'm referring to something on strong realism, my reference is really abstract. This apple is green. Kermit the Frog is green. That is green refers to the universal green. Not so on nominalism. On nominalism, I just have a bunch of different green entities. So then, how do we explain attribute agreement? So there's no problem when it comes to abstract reference, right? We're just saying there is no abstract reference, at least not in the sense that when I predicate properties to objects, I am referring to some universal. I just have several green things. So that's abstract reference. But what about attribute agreement? Well, a nominalist would say, well, there's no problem here. There's nothing that we actually need to explain. It's just a basic metaphysical fact that this apple is green, those blades of grass are green, that Kermit the Frog is green, etc. As Quine puts it here, this is quoted from Crumley, our textbook on page 158. Quine says one may admit that there are red houses, roses, and sunsets, but deny, except as a popular and misleading manner of speaking, that they have anything in common. The words houses, roses, and sunsets are true of sundry individual entities, which are houses and roses and sunsets. And the word red or red object is true of each sundry individual entity of each of sundry individual entities, which are red houses, red roses, and red sunsets. But there is not, in addition, any entity whatever, individual or otherwise, which is named redness. That the houses and the roses and the sunsets are all of them red may be taken as ultimate and irreducible. And it may be held that the realist is no better off in point of real explanatory power for all the occult entities which he posits under such names as redness. Um, I like the way he describes universals as occult entities. um, so what Quine is saying here is like, look, there are all these sundry individual entities, all these separate individual entities, which might have properties in common. Um, but just because we speak about them, in the just because we make these apparently abstract references to universals, or because their attributes agree with one another, in this case, redness, that does not mean that there is a separate abstract universal redness that exists over and above all of them. And this is also really interesting because here's Quine. You know, in one reading, he's trying to take epistemology in a radically different direction, and in another, he's kind of going back to the nominalism of people like William of Ockham. So this is strict nominalism, where we have these two claims. Um, they can explain um, abstract reference and attribute agreement just as easily as a strong realist can. Um, and it's just a basic metaphysical fact that there are these individual entities, like, of different colors or of various other properties, right? Um, there are courageous people, there are virtuous people, but there is no form of virtue or of courage. Um, and that is simpler, it is claimed by the strict nominalists, simpler at any rate than um, strong realism. Yeah, that's fair, Jaden. Yeah, like I also kind of like nominalism, but I don't think I'm a nominalist. Uh I actually quite like a couple of the views that we're going to end off with. Moderate realism and conceptualism are both quite interesting to me. I think I lean toward conceptualism, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. But yeah, I do appreciate that. Um, this does certainly seem to be a simpler view, right? Now, realists might reply to the strict nominalists and say, well, Mr. Strict Nominalist, how are you going to explain why our ordinary view is mistaken? You've just kind of denied that there are universals, but you haven't explained the way in which the realists are really going wrong, other than by, say, failing to apply Occam's razor. Maybe resemblance nominalism can do that. So resemblance blah, 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 resemblance nominalism says that we classify these individual entities together because they resemble one another. So there's still no need to invoke universals here. We just group various items together because they resemble one another. Um, remember the third man problem? which was kind of a problem of resemblance. Who can tell me? Remember before reading week? I know we just went through reading week, so your brains were all probably like, yeah, forget everything. But who remembers the third man problem? Okay, so the third man problem is from Plato, from his dialogue Parmenides, where we have Parmenides talking to like a young Socrates, right? And maybe someone in the chat. Yeah, Khalid's got it. There must be a third form. Yeah, like so say you have like all the large objects which are large by virtue of their participation in the form of largeness. And that's what explains the relation. Well, now you need another form of largeness to explain the relation of the form to the large objects, but that just goes on ad infinitum, right? But what if we forget the idea that there are universals and just go with resemblance, right? So there's no universal. We just class all large objects together because they resemble one another in terms of their largeness. Yeah. Yeah, you've all got it, basically, Natalie and Yusuf. Yeah. So when we do this, let's say I take, to go back to the example, green. I take all the green objects that I have. I have maybe an apple, an avocado, Kermit the Frog. Maybe I even have like a green car or a green electric guitar. When I group those together, based upon their greenness, I'm not categorizing or classifying them under some universal. I'm just I'm just kind of grouping them as a resemblance class. They resemble one another by virtue of their green properties, but that's all there is to it. Again, I mean, you can see how this is simpler. At least the nominalists would say it's simpler than the strong realist position because we're not positing any abstract sort of universal entity that exists over and above the particulars. It's just that the particulars resemble one another enough that we can put them together into a group. But then the realist might reply by saying, hey, well, what if you get the classes wrong? Like dogs. Maybe a dog is universal, right? And this is Crumley's example. Crumley seems to be a real dog person, by the way. The book is like, isn't the book dedicated to his dog? He must really love dogs, which is great. I love dogs too. So let's say that dog is universal. Um, maybe if you're a realist, you say dog is universal. But if you're a nominalist, you say being a dog is just belonging to a class of life forms that share a certain descent and certain physical characteristics, right? So dogs, like the domestic dog, Canis lupus familiaris, um, probably originated from either wolves or some cousin of wolves, which is now extinct. I think um, scientists tend more toward the latter these days. It's probably the case that domestic dogs evolved from like a sort of dog-like cousin of the wolf rather than wolves themselves. But in any case, we could say that if you've got the appropriate lineage and the appropriate physical characteristics, then what you've got is a dog. But that's a motley crew, to say the least, right? Um, so, as Crumley says here, you have an Irish setter, which resembles a golden retriever, which resembles a bulldog, which resembles the Terry Toons cartoon character Deputy Dog, which resembles creatures from the infamous Star Wars bar scene. Um, I think he means Jabba's palace, but let's not nitpick. One of which resembles a Yorkshire Terrier, which resembles a cat a former neighbor once owned. A cat? But cats aren't dogs. So the question is like, where do we draw the line around our resemblance classes if they resemble each other? Well, we're not grouping them as universals. The universal is what's taken to exist by realists over and above the individual entities. What we're doing is grouping them here as a resemblance class, and we're denying that the universal exists. So a realist would say all of these green objects are green by virtue of the fact that they instantiate the universal green. But a nominalist would say there is no universal green. There are just these green things. So it's a question about what, if anything, exists over and above the particular instances of, that property. Does that make sense, McKenna? Yeah. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because universals you have to think of in the abstract. Um, And what the nominalists are doing is saying that, well, no, that's overcomplicating things, right? So, but just to reiterate, like if you have a bunch of green objects and you group them all together by virtue of their greenness, um, those things aren't universals. It's green that is the universal. And then the nominalist just says, well, there is no universal, the green. There are just these green things. And we're grouping them together because they share some similarity. They resemble one another. And now the problem is that the realists reintroduce is, well, how do you draw the line? This is related, I think, to Pernille's question. Let's say that there's a community of speakers um, that don't categorize colors the same way that we do. Um, Maybe they don't distinguish between blue and green objects the way that we do. Um, I think a realist would say blue and green still exist independently. Um, and the nominalist would say, well, they just draw their lines around these two categories differently than we do, right? And so that's the question here. Where do we draw the line between classes if we're going with resemblance? And I know you're going to say, like, look, nobody is going to mistake a cat for a dog because cats are genetically distinct from dogs. I know. But you see the point of the example, right? How do you draw the line between um, kinds of things when you're going with resemblance? That's the question. So Khalid says, in the case of the dog example, the original wolf-like animal that is now extinct would not be considered a universal because today we would group together all animals that share. Well, if you're a realist, you might say, sure, there's a universal category dog, and this is maybe its origin, but not everyone is a realist, right? So a nominalist would say, no, no, there's just a group, a lineage of sort of animals that are similar enough that we might group them all together. But given enough time, maybe you don't. I mean, have you ever seen a wolf and a dog together? They actually look quite different. Even dogs that look similar to wolves look, I think, much different than actual wolves. Um, I mean, put a Chihuahua beside a wolf, you're never going to get them mixed up, right? Um, but and this is maybe Crumley's point here is like, there's enough variation within the category dog that if you had no idea about dogs and cats, you might mistake some cats for dogs, because of the sheer amount of variation in terms of resemblance within the category dog, right? No, because nominalists deny that there are universals. There's only this dog and this dog and that wolf and that wolf and this dog, etc. So this is the question, right? Where do we draw the lines around or in between our different classes? And maybe Wittgenstein can help us. So this is Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was an Austrian philosopher, very big in the 20th century, very influential in the early 20th century. And he thought that maybe we could make a little more sense out of this if we paid closer attention to the ordinary ways that we think and speak. Especially in his later work, this is the approach he takes. So, like the philosophical investigations, for example. And this has come to be called ordinary language philosophy. Now, it's not always easy to sort of nail down um, what Wittgenstein is saying or thinking. But he seems certainly to be more of a nominalist rather than a realist. And it's how we use language, he would say, um, that determines how we group things by resemblance, not the existence of universals. So he illustrates this with the notion of a game. He says that games form a family, and he terms this sort of resemblance family resemblance. I mean, think about it. Um, let's come up with some examples of games. What do they all have in common as games? Someone already mentioned at the start of the class, the Blue Jays. Okay, baseball. Baseball is a game, but there are many other games. What are some games? Monopoly. Yeah, Monopoly. Very different than baseball. Baseball is played on a field, Monopoly on a board. Um, there are no pieces in baseball, but there are pieces in Monopoly. There's also dice and money and deeds for properties you can buy, right? Video games is another one. Video games not played on a board. You need some kind of computer or gaming console or I guess your phone, depending on how you define video game. Manhunt, what's that? Is that where you hunt the most dangerous game? Man? Or is that a game I just haven't heard of? Oh, like tag. Okay, cool. That's neat. That sounds fun. So, uh, you know, the Squid Game. Yeah, they're f fictional games. Like, hopefully, no one's actually playing the Squid Game, but if they did, that would be a sort of murdery sort of game, I guess, right? For grouping individuals under similar things, for universals, a concrete concept has multiple individuals encapsulate it. Uh, well, okay, so if you're a realist, McKenna, then there's the universal, and then there are individual entities which instantiate the universal. So it's like green exists in the abstract, kind of over and above everything. And then these green blades of grass, these green leaves, those green spruce needles over there, they all instantiate the universal. Yeah. So all of these are games, right? Squid Game, baseball, manhunt, video games. Good, good. I'm glad. Yeah, good, good. Um, Monopoly, chess, pool, tag. Um, these are all games. So, but they're all quite different from one another, right? Yeah, there's an example of family resemblance. Deer, elk, moose. They're all different, but they're all sort of similar too, right? Oh, I mean like games we play rather than like game animals. But sorry, I misunderstood. I misunderstood what you were doing there, Khalid. But, just I don't know, we'll say they're the part of the deer family and that you've got deer, elk, moose, um I don't know, caribou are just elk, aren't they? I don't know. Anyway, it's like a family. Yeah, they're related, but it doesn't have to be English. After all, Wittgenstein spoke German, right? He was Austrian. So it doesn't have to be English. Um, Elk and caribou are different? Okay. Oh, it's caribou and reindeer that are the same thing. Yes, yes, that's right. I remember now. Because I remember thinking reindeer, they just look like caribou. And then, yeah, I learned no, they're just the same. But elk and caribou are different. Okay. But you see the idea, whether we're talking about um, various games or various game animals, there's a resemblance, a family resemblance. So these games like baseball is similar to some things we call games like cricket, but quite different from other games like chess. But they're all games by virtue of the fact that they have something in common with one another. For example, baseball and chess are both played for sport, right? So that's family resemblance, and maybe that's how we draw the lines around these classes. Now, Renford, or Renford Bambra claimed that Wittgenstein actually solved the dispute between realists and nominalists. Family resemblance explains how we collect together these different individuals, right? Because they have these overlapping similarities. Kind of like how you and the members of your family have overlapping similarities with one another. Um, we can also think of these as family resemblances as cluster concepts, but we don't need to really worry about this for now. But that's nominalism. Another interesting thing that we can do is appeal to tropes. So these are a different sort of trope than like the tropes from movies and televisions. In philosophy, tropes are individual token-like things. So, how do we make sense of that? Well, think of the type token distinction. So, a type is like a category, and a token is like an example of that category. So, a type would be like, dog or cat. And then a token would be a particular dog or a particular cat. And a trope would be a token like particularized property that one of those objects has. So if the type is cat, then a token of cat would be my cat, Yo-Yo. And some of his tropes might be short fur that's white and orange, right? As opposed to his brother. His brother Oki is also, oh, I've misspelled orange. Uh, he has long orange fur. He's still a type, a token of a type, namely an individual cat, but he's a collection of different tropes. So the shade of orange might be the same for each of these cats. So we have two tropes. Um, the color's the same, um, but we'd say rather than each of these cats instantiating the universal orange, each of them has an orange trope or a trope that is the orange shade of their fur. Does that make sense to you all? Or think of the leaves and the needles and the blades of grass. They're all green. In this case, on trope resemblance nominalism, they're green because we have a collection of green tropes. That's an example of like a TV trope or a movie trope, but this is a different sort of trope. It's not a narrative trope. It's a philosophical trope. So yeah, you can say, um, you know, a narrative example, there's the damsel in distress. So there's numerous examples. I can't think of any. Um, but there's a damsel in distress in this story and in that story and in this book and in that movie. Tropes in philosophy are particularized properties. So there's green, but it's because there's that green and that green and that green and this green. Yeah, I guess you could think of them like that. You could think of tropes adjectively, if that makes sense. Not just a word for grouping. On trope theory, like there's something that individuals actually have. Um, so all of these individual blades of grass in front of me on the lawn here, those are all little individual green tropes. And I can categorize all of the blades of grass as the same color because they all have the same trope. So that's trope resemblance nominalism. Like in the cat example, oh, now it's starting to get cold. So in the cat example, right, one of my cats, one of the tropes that constitutes one of the cats resembles a trope that constitutes the other cat. So the short orange fur of my one cat resembles the long orange fur of the other cat. Now, they don't have all the tropes in common, right? One has short fur, one has long fur, one has white fur, the other does not. But we can explain why they resemble one another because they each have a trope, and those tropes are similar enough that we can group the cats together as uh, orange, right? Um, Now, a realist might jump in and say, "Whoa, Mr. Nominalist, this isn't this isn't very simple. This isn't any simpler than our explanation because we'd have to posit so many different kinds of tropes." And maybe a universal has snuck back in here, right? In the form of these individualized, particularized properties. After all, Bertrand Russell pointed out that every nominalist, whether you're a strict nominalist, a resemblance nominalist, or a trope resemblance nominalist, you have to admit that there is resemblance, and resemblance itself sounds like a universal. So maybe nominalism isn't the way to go. Yes, yeah, I think that's correct. The type is orange, and there are two different tropes. So, what comes after nominalism? Well, moderate realism. How are we doing for time? Not bad. So, moderate realism says that there are universals, but they don't exist over and above the objects. They exist in the objects. So, Aristotle was a moderate realist. Here's one of the ways that he departs from Plato, for example, right? Remember the School of Athens, which I think I showed you all, or that could have been my other class. But in any case, you can look up Raphael's The School of Athens, and the two figures at the center are Plato and Aristotle, and Plato is pointing up, Aristotle's pointing down. Um, Plato is the strong realist. He's pointing up to the forms, which are more real. Aristotle's pointing here at this world. Now, please note, I depart quite significantly from Crumley here. I'm going to give you some background that Crumley doesn't give you about Aristotle. Just nothing wrong with Crumley's approach. It's just this is the way that I like to teach this. Um, so Aristotle understands individual entities. He understands what things are, beings, in terms of hylomorphism, which I guess you can understand as a sort of like matter formism or matter formness. This tells us, according to Aristotle, what the essence of a particular thing is. Remember, remember also that Plato said that the forms were more real than the individual entities in our world, right? So I'm sitting at a picnic table, and somewhere out there is a form of a table, which is where all tables get their reality. And this perfect form of the table is, well, it's perfect. It's more perfect than any actual table that we could make. Um, now, Plato thinks that we grasp the reality of the forms with the intellect. So does Aristotle, but Aristotle's talking about the forms of individual entities, not like capital F forms that exist above and beyond individual entities. We do this via sort of process of abstraction, right? We extract the universals, but the universals are there in the object. So by looking at this table, I can sort of extract the form of table with my intellect, but that is in the object, not over and above the object. So hylomorphism, the form is important, but the form is nothing without the matter. Without matter, um, form is just an idea, right? And without form, matter is just, well, just stuff. It isn't anything. Um, so let's try and see how this works a little further by talking about Aristotle's theory of causality. Oh, my goodness, I need some more coffee here. So let's say, something that maybe Aristotle or Plato might have seen at some point in their existence, something like a cast of a god, like Zeus, a bronze cast, like the bust of Zeus or something. Maybe it's his head and he's got the thunderbolt or something. So, how do we want to understand, or how are we going to understand this individual entity, this cast of Zeus? Well, for Aristotle, we need to understand its causes. And we're not talking physical causation. Like, remember back when we were talking about David Hume and the uniformity principle? Um, we talked briefly about cause and effect, and the notion of cause and effect that philosophers started to adopt in around that time, the early modern period. the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, was a notion of physical causation or material causation, where objects affect one another. A causes B, causes C, causes D, etc., right? But Aristotelian causation is different. To understand this cast of Zeus, you have to understand the material cause. So that's the material that something is made out of. In this case, it's the bronze. The formal cause, which is the form it takes. Um, so that's the form of Zeus. The efficient cause, that's what brought it into being. In this case, it's an artisan or a craftsman or something. And the final cause, and that is what it is for. So maybe our cast of Zeus is to be placed in a temple for worshiping Zeus. Maybe it's just supposed to be a decoration. Maybe it's a paperweight, right? But what is it for? To understand an object, you've got to understand the four causes. But in the first two, you can see Aristotle's hylomorphism, right? Um, if you want to have a bronze cast of Zeus, you need the form and you need the matter. Without the form, you've just got a lump of bronze. And without the matter, you don't have anything at all. Now, where Plato thought that these universal forms, in this case a form of Zeus, existed over and above the individual, Aristotle thought it was in the entity itself. So if you've got your cast of Zeus, the form is its formal cause. It's in the entity. It's in the actual statue. We could say that the universals are immanent, right? Rather than transcendent. The method doesn't really matter for Aristotle. Perhaps because there's more than one way to imbue something with a certain form. So he's not really interested in that. Like I could pour the bronze into a cast, or I could chip away at it with a hammer and chisel, perhaps. For Aristotle, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't care. What he cares about is that there is an efficient cause who takes the material cause and gives it form for some purpose. So he doesn't care about the method. He does care about the cause itself, the efficient cause itself. Um, and you could talk about this there, but yeah, it's kind of inconsequential. Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, think of it this way. It's different when you're talking about artifacts than for living beings, but living beings, we can talk about living beings. We will when we talk about, we're going to talk about Aristotle more when we talk about things starting on Thursday. But take, for example, a human being. Um, so, an ordinary human being, like any one of us, what is our material cause? Go ahead in the chat. What's a material cause of a human being? You could say that we have more than one. Yeah, carbon is certainly one of them. Got a lot of carbon in here. Water. Yeah, that's right, Galen. What else? We've got calcium in our bones. Well, that's not a material cause, Samir. Um, Blood has iron. Yeah, right. So all of the materials that we're made of which there are many, that would be the material cause. Now, what's the formal cause? This one might be a little bit tricky. What is the formal cause of a human being? Parents would be your efficient cause. Excuse me. Yes, your parents are your efficient cause. They're what brought you into being. But your formal cause, what's your formal cause? Bipedal flesh bag? Yeah, yeah, the shape of a humanoid figure, whatever your DNA says. Yeah. Aristotle would have said it's your soul. But for Aristotle, the soul is not, um, your spirit. The soul for Aristotle is the form of an organized living body. So if you took all the stuff that I was made of, water, carbon, iron, calcium, etc., and you just poured it all into a bucket and mix it around, you just have a big old bucket of goo. But if you take the same material and put it together in the right way, like the way that our DNA spells out, for example, well, then you have a human being. That is the soul for Aristotle. It's not it's not a ghost in the machine. It's not a spirit that lives within the body. The soul is the form of your body, of your living body for Aristotle. So that's the formal cause. Then the material cause is your parents, and the final cause would be whatever you're for. Aristotle would probably say something like, we're meant to be rational political creatures that use language, right? That's what we're for, and really, it's all about trying to live a good life by doing philosophy, right? Um, but let us say, and this is getting to the question, I think it was Khalid, right, about a method, right? You could have a human being, maybe that was made in a lab. So the efficient cause of this human is not like two parents who love each other, and when two people love each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that's where babies come from, right? It's not like that. Um, Rather, in this case, a scientist has grown you in a test tube. Um, so the method and yeah, it's like a synthetic method, Khalid, exactly. So you'd still be a human being, but you'd have a different efficient cause, which would entail a different, I guess, method of bringing you about. So that's where those differences would kind of manifest themselves, I suppose, is when you're looking at the efficient causes of certain things, of which there could be many. Let's move on to conceptualism. This is due to Peter Abelard, another medieval thinker, this time a French thinker. Um, Now, Abelard has been interpreted in different ways. Some people have interpreted him as a moderate realist, like Aristotle. Some have interpreted him as a nominalist, like William of Ockham. And some, as Crumley does here, as a conceptualist. And we're going to follow Crumley in interpreting Abelard as a conceptualist. So for conceptualists like Abelard, universals are concepts. That is, they're a sort of mental representation. They exist in the mind, but they can refer to lots of non-mental objects, that is, real objects that exist in the world. So there are universals like green, but they are not over and above the objects which instantiate them, like the realists say. They're not in the objects, like the moderate realists say. They're in the mind, and they can refer to lots of different non-mental objects. Like my idea of green, my concept of green, I can use it to refer to the green on my coffee cup and coffee sleeve, to the leaves on the trees, to the blades of the grass, to the needles on those trees, etc. So if you want, you can think of these concepts as like mental particulars, but they're universal in the sense that they can refer to multiple particulars. Now, Abelard you can definitely interpret him as a moderate realist, but he's absolutely not a strong realist because, according to Abelard, these concepts require a mind. They can't exist over and above anything because they're mental items, right? Concepts are mental items. Concepts don't exist in the world, they exist here in our minds. So he's definitely not a strong realist. You could read him as a moderate realist, but we're not doing that. Uh, One thing he does have in common with moderate realism, and maybe this is why he's sometimes read this way, is that we discover these concepts via abstraction, right? We can look at this green object, look at that green object. They all have something in common, green, and you can understand green in the abstract, right? You can understand green independently of the green objects which instantiate it. But unlike Aristotle, um, who says we get the this universal from grasping the intelligible form, what I do is I abstract away all the individual differences and see what's left. When I do that with all the green objects surrounding me, forget about the all the different properties of the grass and the leaves and the coffee cup. What they have in common, once you take everything else away, is this green, and that's where I get the concept from. And unlike moderate realism, the universals don't exist in the particulars. They exist, again, in the mind. So there are no immanent universals on conceptualism. Again, you don't have to read Abelard this way, but I think reading him this way helps paint a picture of conceptualism. Could we try and come up with some examples to maybe highlight some of the differences between moderate realism and conceptualism before we finish up? Oh, it's getting cold. Well, cold. That's a good example. Right now, I'm cold, but there are other cold things that I've experienced. I've been cold here when the cold wind starts blowing. Uh, I've had other experiences of cold. The coldest I ever was, I think, was I was going to I was with some old friends and we were going to like a stag and doe or a wedding reception or a part. I don't remember what it was. It was for like a friend of a friend that I used to have. But we were up in northern Ontario. I think we were up in Elliott Lake, which is not super far north, but it's far enough. We were also having quite a bad cold snap. And the temperature went down to like minus 46 or something. It was crazy cold, right? I think that might be the coldest I've ever been. Oh, wasp. And then there are other cold things like ice cubes, which I've felt. Take some ice cubes out of the tray with my hand and put them in a glass. And, oh, that's pretty cold. I abstract away from all of the differences, and what I have left is just this concept of what is cold. Now, a moderate realist would say that the that these universal the universal cold exists in the ice cubes, in the cold air, now and in the past when I was very cold up in northern Ontario, right? Um, a conceptualist would say, no, this is not imminent in the cold objects or circumstances, but rather it is a concept that you've acquired. And now you can apply it to other things. Like I go into the Starbucks after class and look at the fridge and say, oh, it's probably cold in there because I have this concept of cold, right? So McKenna, that's a good question. The difference is, like, if you're a strong realist, the universals exist over and above the particulars, but you can grasp the universals with the intellect. And this is a huge theme in Plato, for example, right? Pick any Platonic dialogue. I think the Meno is mentioned at certain points in our course text, where Socrates and Meno start off inquiring about virtue, right? Um, uh, Here the idea is that the form of virtue can be grasped with the intellect, but it's not mind dependent. It exists independently of the mind. But on conceptualism, these things don't exist independently of the mind. I have a concept of virtue. You have a concept of virtue that we've acquired by looking at like these little individual examples of virtue, abstracting everything away and just kind of being left with this sort of essential concept of virtue. But it doesn't exist over and above. It exists just in the mind. On strong realism, the universals do exist over and above the particulars, and they can be grasped with the intellect, but they don't exist within the intellect. Does that make sense? Oh, it's so cold. Thank you. I'm always happy to hear that my explanations are helpful. Well, that's all I really have for you today. So before the break, we covered strong realism, and I did kind of go through a bit of a long-winded recap, right, where we talked about strong realism as an answer to the problems around abstract reference and attribute agreement, which are really like questions concerning the way we talk and think about these things, as much as they are questions about whether these things exist. Like we're inquiring into the nature of universals just as much as we're inquiring into the ways in which we think and speak about them, which is why philosophy is so freaking cool, man. Um, and then today we talked about nominalism, moderate realism, and conceptualism. None of this is on this week's quiz, right? But it will be on the third quiz. And a reminder, this week's quiz is due at 11:59 p.m. on the 31st, so Halloween. If you have stuff going on for Halloween, I encourage you to get the quiz done before the 31st. Um, it's pretty much exactly like before, except as mentioned at the beginning of lecture, I've added an extra question or an extra point for each of the short answer questions where you can get up to 6 points instead of five, and that sixth point will be for clarity and precision. The third and final quiz might be a little longer than the other two, by the way, just because of the pace at which we've been working through the material. There's going to be a lot of material I'm going to have to quiz you on. So, but I want to let you know that if the third and final quiz does have more material, I will give you more time to write it. But we'll deal with that when the time comes. So thanks everybody. This was a fun one. Well, quiz one is marked, and you can see your grades. Yep. You can't see them in the grade book, but you can go to quizzes and then look up your results. There's instructions how to do this. Like just Google, how do I look at my quiz results on Carleton University's Brightspace, and Google it, and you'll get instructions. Well, for this quiz, it's the same amount of questions as before. For the final quiz, yes, the weight will be the same. Um, um, like I'll have more to say about this when the time approaches. For now, just focus on quiz two, which is very similar in structure to the first one, except there are those additional points you can earn for clarity and precision. And yeah, for this quiz, you're going to have four short answer questions and 10 true false multiple choice. Yeah, it's on theories of justification, new directions in epistemology, and perception. So,
Class. I didn't want to miss this class. Do you mind if I just sit
oh, well,
down?
we're just finishing actually. Yeah, yeah. Uh, well, I was just about to say goodbye to everybody. Yeah, it's okay. I would just watch the recording. Yeah, I'm gonna upload it after like this evening. So, yeah, yeah, just tune in the recording and you'll be all caught up. Okay. Sorry, everyone, a student who's in this class. Um, so yeah, where was I? Yeah, four short answer questions, 10 true false multi-choice on this quiz. 75-minute time limit, open book. Open book does not mean you can use AI or search engines or copy and paste. Come up with those answers in your own words. I know you can do it. Okay, everyone. I'll see you on Thursday. And on Thursday, we will begin talking about things. That is particulars. So I'll see you on Thursday. All right. Bye for now, everyone.